how this whole thing worked. So Aaron gets on the phone with me. He was delivered all of the information several days before. And the first thing he says, he goes, Bob, $250,000 is just the average. There are people above the average, people below the average. It's an average. And the conversation went exactly like this, because I'll never forget it. I said, Aaron, okay, I'll give you the $250,000 average. What number do you want me to use? 300? 350? I said, how about 400,000? Is 400,000 sufficiently above the $250,000 average for me to make my case? And he goes, sure, go ahead. I said, fine, you've got all the numbers in front of you. I had 523,000 on my pro forma, but we're gonna use 400,000. The difference is 123,000. Do you agree? He goes, yes. I said, fine, but you've gotta take that $123,000 away from my $75,000 net profit, because that 123 no longer exists. I now have a net loss of between $45,000 and $50,000. Do you give me the loan? Dead silence on the phone. I said, let me do you one better, Aaron. Let's go to 450,000. I now show a break even. Do you give me the loan? And he goes, no, we don't. I see what they're doing. They're backing into the number. I said, thank you very much. And that started a number of SBA and GAO investigations. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm not even going to go into, well, basically, I know you just spoke to.
Well, they're all highlighted in the bill,
okay.
in the bill and the findings, all three are
Right.
referenced.
And Deborah Williams had the same experience.
We're gonna have a lot of high school students joining us. And
He's
so,
waiting to-
forgive me for the interruption.
Okay.
Yeah, hey, Keith Ellison. Yeah, they're all, some of them wanna be entrepreneurs, so,
They'll get to sit in the big boy chairs.
yeah, you know.
Future.
This is the future, this is the future. Forgive me, I'm sorry about the interruption.
No, that's okay.
But they're all very smart, wise scholars, and all want to learn about franchising. So, come on in, guys. Come on, come on, come on. And their esteemed faculty has joined them as well.
I was gonna say, you looked a little older for the average.
You guys can sit in some of these seats over here too, if you like. All right, sorry about the interruption.
That's okay. So you had already heard the story about Deborah Williams, and again, the chief operating officer testified under oath that they only had one franchisee in the entire system making money, two of them breaking even, and everybody else was losing money. Yet it was funny how all of these franchisees, new franchisees, were receiving similar numbers in order to obtain their SBA loans, even though they knew that the system was unprofitable. It actually goes a little further in that we actually had a friend of mine, someone that I knew from a franchise called Kitty Academy, and he actually received the revenue numbers from the franchisor on company letterhead. Now, you would think that that would prove to a court that these people were defrauded. Unfortunately, there's a little something called the integration clause in the contract. And the contract basically, out of maybe a 40, 50-page contract, there is one sentence that says, you did not rely on anything outside of this contract to make your decision. Well, all of the numbers that we received are given to us outside of the contract. So the judge threw the case out of court, basically saying, sorry guys, but you signed here that you didn't rely on anything outside of the contract. It doesn't matter that it's on any letterhead at all. You guys are done. We're out. What's important to understand is that, as Roy was saying, is that the SBA loan loss is not the only loss. As Keith was saying, that 28% guarantee payment, those are people who lost everything before that guarantee ever came out. That 14% that was paid out in total dollars, in order for the franchise loans to be self-sufficient, that means you would have to charge franchisees roughly 14 points in fees on their loans in order to cover the failures of the franchise systems. Obviously, they don't do that because no one would take out a loan where they were charged 14 points in fees. So how is it covered? It's covered by all of the mom and pop stores that are out there that are paying higher fees, higher interest rates to offset the losses that the franchisees are that are getting hit with. And you know, it's rather interesting that the mom and pop stores have to now come and bail me out for a franchise system, and the franchise systems are owned by corporations, they're owned by private equity groups. We're subsidizing the private equity groups and the corporations, and we're hitting the small mom and pop people. It makes no sense at all. I lost my loan, about $275,000 was paid out in the guarantee. Credit cards, about another $100,000, so those are all banks that lost that. I took out a second mortgage, $200,000 in order to keep this thing going, lost all of that. And that doesn't count various and sundry other bills, as my landlord lost out on about $200,000 in additional rent. It took him about 1.5 to 2 years to re-rent that space. And what's really sad about all of this is, as you start looking into who are buying franchises, I'm assuming maybe I can get a couple more minutes. Veterans now are being targeted. There was something called the Patriot Express Loan Program. Okay, and the Patriot Express Loan Program was a loan program by the SBA specifically for veterans, so that they could come in. It's pretty much guaranteed money. The second they go in, they ask for the money, they can go ahead and get this money to buy franchises, or any actually business. But franchisors realized once that this loan program came out in 2008, that they started focusing right on them. They knew that these were perfect marks. By 2013, the GAO put out a report on the Patriot Express Loan Program and found that it had the highest default rate of any SBA loan program out there. So as we were pushing on the SBA to provide additional information on franchising, they not only stopped providing us with any of that information at all, they stopped providing all the default rates. They're hiding all of the information at this point, saying that they are not required to do it. And because they're not required, they're not going to. We've had several congressmen and senators write in for specifics, and the SBA has responded basically saying, no, we don't have to give this to you. So now they took the Patriot Express Loan Program, and we started hitting them on that, and they decided we're going to get rid of the Patriot Express Loan Program. We're not going to call it that anymore. What we're going to do is continue to give military veterans these loans, same 7A process, but what we're going to do is wrap it all into the 7A program itself. So you can no longer pull out how bad the default rates are for the veteran loans. Rather interesting that all of a sudden they did the same thing to franchise loans, they're now doing it to the veterans loans as well. So what we're asking for is for the SBA to, if you're going to, or let me rephrase that, we're asking the franchisors, if you are going to request request SBA money, government taxpayer-funded money, then the person who is receiving that loan should know what those default rates are. It's a simple request. Let me rephrase that, not the default rates. They should know what the actual revenue numbers are. This way we can make a decision. Had I known that that $500,000 number was incorrect, that the actual number was $250,000, that I was expected, and the franchisor knew that I was going to probably lose $130,000 in my first year, over and above my family expenses of my mortgage and keeping, watching over my kids and everything else, I would never have signed up for that. And no, neither would anyone else. All we're asking for are those first year numbers so that when we are doing a pro forma, we know what to expect. And I would add on to Keith and say, we're not trying to stop SBA lending. We're not trying to close down the SBA. We are not trying to stop SBA lending to franchises. I would say, truthfully, let the SBA lend to every franchise, regardless of whether or not it's profitable. But first and foremost, put out those numbers to the borrower so that they know what to expect. They know whether or not they can afford this. They know whether putting up their home, their family's life savings, which, by the way, includes your college kids' money, because that money is not protected under bankruptcy laws. You should know what you're getting into, and that's what this bill does. It gives us those first-year numbers. I want to thank Congressman Ellison, by the way, for not only setting this all up, and you too, Carol, but also having the fortitude for putting this bill forward. And we greatly appreciate everything you've done for us. Thank you.
And we'll let the Congressman speak in 1 second. I just wanted to follow up on one last point. Thank you, Bob. You ask why this happens, and it really is all, it's always follow the money. When Bob's loan was funded, $300,000 loan, the day it was funded, the franchise company took in a $54,000 franchise fee. Within a couple weeks of that, these banks are selling these off as government-backed securities on the secondary market. I think all of you will find that very familiar, that sounding. It's the housing crisis all over again. We understand that banks take 12 to 20 points on these loans. Let's say 12 points on his $300,000 loan. That's $36,000. So why is this happening? There's $90,000 in profit on that government guaranteed loan by two entities that have zero risk involved right off the bat. And since we have William Smith here, who was working for Senator Sessions last year, and they wrote a letter to the SBA. I think it was correctly coined as we have created a moral hazard situation in this process. And I think that says it well. And lastly, just to again reiterate, the CFA as an organization supports SBA loans and has often lobbied on behalf of more SBA loans. However, we feel franchisees should be protected by true disclosure and transparency. We also feel that there will actually be more money available to create true long-term jobs and wealth when that money is available at lower fees.
If I could just, one more thing.
Oh, you?
Yeah, if you
I
don't mind.
triggered
just-
something.
I know, there was one other thing. And the one thing we haven't discussed here is the default rates. So just for you to get an idea, when you're looking at default rates of 40, 50, 60, 70% in these franchises, and yet the SBA continues to put out these loans based upon what are obviously fraudulently inflated numbers, you can't tell me that a system has a 50% default rate and yet generates a first-year net profit of X. It doesn't happen. In fact, when Huntington Learning Center, which was one of the key franchises that were focused on in these investigations, we have a 49% default rate, a number which, by the way, is now hidden by the SBA. And to make matters worse, when the GAO did their investigation and the lead investigator came back, he said, Bob, the number isn't 49%. The actual default rate over the time period that they looked, which I believe was 03 to 2012, was 65%. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. We're talking about Cold Stone Creamery at 46%, Planet Beach at 61%, Petland at 61%. I mean, how can you allow people, citizens, your constituents and veterans, to go into these things not knowing what the real numbers are?
Hey everybody, my name is Keith Ellison, and I just want to say thank you for being here. I'm just going to give you a little, in the spirit of full disclosure, I want to tell you a little bit about how I arrived to be the chief author of the piece of legislation that we're considering here today, which is on the SBA Franchise Loan Transparency Act. I was just concerned that our country, which I believe is most characterized by the words like opportunity, possibility, things like that, was literally losing its organizing principle of opportunity and possibility. And the thing that was really informing me was these stagnating wages that we've seen over the course of the last several decades. And so I said, well, we need to see the minimum wage go up. So then I started encountering small business people who said, Keith, we'd like to pay our people more. When we pay our people more, they stay around more. When we pay our people more, they have more loyalty, and we don't have to retrain them as often, which is an expensive proposition. But I want to tell you something. You may not know, Keith Ellison, that we're not walking on a crystal stair ourselves. It's not like we got a bunch of money and we're just not sharing it with our employees. And I started hearing horror stories from franchisee owners about difficulties they're going through, and I became convinced that part of the way to recreate opportunity and possibility for Americans is to really dig into these franchise agreements and try to make sure that there's some fairness involved, so that the promise of the franchise and franchising, I still believe is in principle a good thing, can be something where a small business person can really realize their dream, employ people at good, decent wages and benefits. But what I found out is there's a lot of very incredible, difficult stories. And I'm glad you mentioned, Keith, that this thing has all the hallmarks of that mortgage crisis, because it was a classic example of some people being able to profit by not risking anything, just basically charging a rent and then moving the risk away from themselves. And it's a great way to get money, but it's not a good way to run an economy. So, as I said, it wasn't long before I started hearing the horror stories of people who bought what they were told were successful franchise models, only to lose everything: their home, their retirement accounts, their investment opportunities, their marriages, due to fraud, greed, and other bad behavior. I recommend you listen to stories of franchisee owners on a podcast that I did called We the Podcast Special Investigation on Franchisees. We usually try to keep it around 10 minutes. This one went actually pretty long because we just needed the time to tell the stories of these folks. Talking with business owners opened my eyes to the urgent need for reform. So that's why I introduced two bills. One, the Fair Franchise Act, and if your members can join us, I would really appreciate it. We need more support. We have some bipartisan support. And we also, today we're here to talk about the SBA Loan Transparency Act, and we've already got a lot of good information on that. Now, the bill we're here to discuss today, which is the SBA Loan Transparency Bill, uses the power of the federal government to ensure fair treatment of franchisees. Many new franchises encourage their franchisees to get small business loans, guaranteed loan. I wanted to leverage that connection, a taxpayer subsidized loan, to require that the franchisor provide an average annual revenue data for the first year of operation. We can't have the American people subsidizing a system where more than 28% of SBA guaranteed loans to franchisees default. The default numbers are even worse than that in many cases. In some cases, as Bob noted, many franchisees pay off their SBA loan but are financially ruined in the process. Entrepreneurs, and I want you all to know, I was talking with these young people today and I asked them what they wanted to be. And one of them said, I want to be an entrepreneur. So I said, kid, you got to come to this hearing. And entrepreneurs invest in franchises to buy into a proven model. Consumers like it because, one franchisee in Peoria is the same as in Minneapolis, the same as in DC. The SBA should require franchisors to provide accurate financial information to the franchisee and the lender in order to receive a taxpayer subsidized loan. So in closing, I hope you can join me. We want to really add a lot of sponsors to this, and I want to just tell you, we need this bill to be bipartisan. It can't be the property of one party or another. This is another way for us to join hands across the aisle, because I don't know any Republicans or Democrats who don't care about small business people. Today, 2015, who is the small business person? In many cases, they're a franchisee. Who's sponsoring the baseball teams? Who's out here being that pillar of the community? Our franchisees. It's time for us to stand next to them and help them succeed by making a more level playing field and looking after our money. How about that for a change? So that's all I want to say, and I want to thank you guys, and just want to say, congratulations on all the work that we've done so far. We got a whole lot more to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we can open it for questions. If anyone has any questions? Or the sign-up sheet for co-sponsors for your bosses? Yes.
Yeah, so I'm John from Congressman Bowles' office. So you guys have talked about how this unfairly, besides just the CFA supporting this, that also these higher rates have affected mom and pop shops too. Do you guys have support from any other small business industries? Any other?
Well, it's mainly our members who have signed on to this bill at this point. And let me say one thing. In the bill, we exempted the lodging industry. So sometimes people ask why. And actually, our biggest member in the CFA is AHOA, which they're 14,000 members strong and own 43% of the hotel motel rooms in the country, their membership. The lodging industry, number one, is very hard to get an average unit volume that means anything. If you have a Holiday Inn Express with 100 rooms and 150 rooms, if you have a Holiday Inn Express with 100 rooms and 150 rooms, it's kind of apples to oranges. The other thing is the lodging industry on their SBA loans has basically a zero default rate. They don't default. One, because they have true equity there. There's dirt and a building. And so there's actually, if they did default, there's something to repossess, where in many franchises, me as a Subway franchisee, if I default on an SBA loan, I have used equipment, which has very little value. Almost all the brands in the lodging industry literally have a 0%. I think the worst brand, and I don't even remember which one it was, is probably still under a 5% default rate. And these are the people who are probably being damaged the most by this, because if they're having to charge 1% higher, they're taking out $3 to $5 million loans. Now, I know what us franchisees make, and I kind of have an idea what most congressional staffers make, and 1% on $3 to $5 million a year is kind of real money, isn't it? And so, again, that's really the goal of it.
And also, like, so has there been pushback from franchises on this?
Franchise companies don't want to disclose numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, they, and you know, we're not asking them to disclose P&Ls. You know, I own 3 Subways. If I own 3 non-franchised sub sandwich shops, had 3 Keith's subs out there, and I went to try to get a 4th one open and get an SBA loan, the SBA is going to require full financials on those other 3 stores. We're not asking for full financials because there's so many variations in those. We know we can solve almost all of the problems by just getting a revenue number, because we won't have revenue numbers being reverse engineered like Bob told you about, of what profit do I need to make and how do I get to a revenue number. You know, if you have an average revenue, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how to calculate down to your profit. And it is, as he said, when the SBA pushed back and said, well, it's an estimate or it's an average. I get that. But if you were going to open a Huntington and you knew the average first year was $250,000 and you came in with a $500,000 first year estimate, you're going to have some explaining to do. Now, you may be able to say, I'm opening in Manhattan, I'm opening a double square footage outlet that serves 10 times the population. You may be able to hit 500,000, but what are the odds that 12 out of 12 loans given that year are all at $500,000 when the average first year is 250? And oh, by the way, the average for the chain for a mature outlet, which you could see in a Huntington, takes a couple years to get up to a mature level. The average for a mature was what, 465? So all of those estimates were higher, numbers given were higher than that.
I'm sorry.
The last point is, you know, this GAO study, we know that that GAO study was actually toned down and what probably, I'll use the word whitewashed. The lead investigator on that study quit the agency over it because the data that he collected with the knowledge of the fraud going on was not reported. We don't know the specifics of it because obviously we can't be given the specifics of it. But he was a longtime investigator for the government, a forensic accountant, and literally quit over what was released. And yet that study, when you look at the cover page, is actually pretty damning in itself.
So even that 28% number that is in the GAO report you're saying is very low.
Well, it's the actual payout, but again, the default rates, the actual failures is higher than that. People will point to the economy, you know, turning bad in 2009. That probably upped that number a little bit, but you got to remember before that time you had failing businesses that probably were kept afloat by their home equity line because all of us who owned a home could get an equity line for just about any amount we wanted to keep that supported. And that was one of the things that changed the industry too, of course, is when home equity, easy access to money, made those businesses that were losing money actually go out of business instead of just keep losing money.
Okay. And so, just to keep said that like this bill will solve essentially 97% of the problem.
90-something%, yeah.
What are that percent of the problems that aren't going to be addressed?
Well, I mean, again, first-year revenue still, I mean, it'd be great if we could get true average P&L numbers. You know, I mean, you would get the even, you know, more detailed on data that you could get that would help. But the reality is, the cases that you're hearing here, just a gross revenue number shows that the numbers that they were given are so out of line that it would, you know, what we're seeing in most cases is the numbers that were given on these applications from what they got from the franchise companies were so out of line, it's not even close that you even need to get into that level of detail. Let me quickly also hit what the bill actually asks for. It asks for first-year revenues for the last 5 years, because that's kind of an economic cycle time. It asks for first-year failures during that time. And the reason is, my friend at the FTC reminded me that, well, Keith, if a business goes out of business in the first year, it never hits a first-year average. Anyway, so that, it asks for average unit revenue for the chain, so all the mature things, separating out top 25% average, middle 50, bottom 25, you know, so it gives you an idea of the bell curve, of how narrow or wide that bell curve is. And in all cases, it's for franchised units, because you heard, I think one of them said something about what's disclosed in the disclosure document. A lot of times when financial data is given in the disclosure document, it looks pretty good, but it's got one of those little asterisks by it, and on the bottom it says, these are the numbers for the 3 company-owned stores. They do not represent the 250 franchise outlets or something like that. And so obviously, usually the company has the, you know, the big units or the standout units, and so those numbers look better. And the last thing it asks for is just disclosure of when the lender and the franchise company are talking about financials, that has to be disclosed. It's really all about transparency.
Just one,
Even on the FDDs, if a potential franchisee enters into an agreement, they're using the FDD document, the averages, and let's say in Bob, in your circumstances, that the numbers weren't good in the first place, but even after you sign an agreement, certain things from the franchisor on the expense side can still change, even after you sign an agreement, correct? In other words, whatever the averages are, and it may show from whatever period of time, but certain expense lines can still go up in operating the business or the franchise.
The disclosure is what things are the day you sign the disclosure. And the business model can change. And that's what happened to Cold Stone and a lot of, they started up, Cold Stone and Quiznos both, the distribution channel started charging huge markups, which completely changed the business model. Guess what? More than 50% of Quiznos loans, or about 50% on 2,000 loans, defaulted. The main reason was the franchise company, in a sense, changed the business model by changing that expense, you say.
you had mentioned, a gentleman here in front had asked about franchisors and what they thought. There's actually a senior member of a franchisor organization who wrote a blog, if you will. And in it, he listed 4 reasons why they didn't want to provide revenue numbers. And the last one was because some of them, the numbers are so bad, no one would want to own them. It's in his blog.
Yeah.
He then tried to say that I took it out of context. I'm like, no, you listed four reasons. He did say you have to do your due diligence. I agree wholeheartedly. But when someone is under contract where they cannot speak ill of the franchisor and provide that information, well, how do you do your due diligence when you're told by the FTC you do your due diligence by calling franchisees? And yet the franchisees are under contract to not provide you with the information if it's bad. So you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
And currently, they are not required to disclose anything in the item 19 financial disclosure part of the disclosure document. They are not, they can leave that blank. Cold Stone leaves that blank. We are not requiring every franchise to have to disclose this information. Only those that get taxpayer guaranteed loans.
That's it.
Right, but I would say this, the template that is designed for the SBA, let's say that the template use or abuse or closely model their lending practices right off of what the SBA is doing. So even outside of the SBA, I'm a 7-Eleven franchisee. And 7-Eleven franchises don't typically qualify for SBA loans. You may be surprised by that. But the model that's developed, what's good for the SBA, what we do nationally for the SBA may be good for private business that is not going through SBA as well.
Any other questions? Thank you all very much for your time. My contact information is in the card on each of the folders you would have gotten. If you'd like to discuss more, catch me in between making sandwiches when I'm back on the West Coast. And make sure you sign in and so we know how to contact you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.